Hi there, my name is Kelley Cody Grimm.
And I'm Max Grimm.
And we are Creative Actors Lab. What we want to do is just talk a little bit about how you can bring creativity into your everyday life. Hey everybody, it's Kelley.
And Max.
And another podcast. And today what we were talking about is just when you're doing characters sometimes, and this is also a good exercise for our writing friends as well, is being your own private detective and trying to figure out what is motivating your character to do the things that they do. And, I know people love true crime, true detective, things like that. So kind of what we're doing, like if you were going to hire a private detective and a woman comes in and goes, I know something's up. There is so much going on right now that they are not telling me, and I want you to get to the bottom of it, please. But anyway, we just thought it would be kind of fun because, yes, there are the standard, what is your objective? What is your obstacle? What is your inner voice? All those things. But sometimes it is interesting to just kind of look at yourself as, hey, if I were my own private detective and I was trying to figure out what is actually going on with my character, how would I go about that? What sort of things would I observe if I had somebody who was trailing me? What sort of physicalities would they notice? What restaurants would they notice that I go to? What kind of friends would they notice that I hang out with?
Your patterns and behavior.
Patterns and behavior that they would report that to that very overwrought woman that we just heard. So yeah, we just kind of wanted to throw that out today and, just talk a little bit about when you are. And then at the end, I do have this really cool character checklist that is great to use, again, whether you were a writer or an actor, just to kind of give you a little bit of background. Because the thing is, sometimes you're given sides and you know nothing.
And you have maybe 3 lines.
Or you may have a page and a half. You get a little bit. There may be a log line. But what you want to be able to build for yourself is really who this character is. Again, even if it's the 3 lines. But you want to be able to have something that's realistic, something that is absolutely true. And so many actors really do like to go through this process. You were looking at a video with Viola Davis. And she had done the movie Doubt with Meryl Streep. And so when she came in, and Viola Davis, yeah, she's got skills. And so Meryl Streep asked her, I'm like, oh, yes, I was looking at your character, and it's wonderful to work with you. What do you think your father did for a living? And Viola Davis was like, that was a really good question because I needed to think about that. That was going to have me reflect on how my character is responding to what's happening at this private school. Did we have a pretty good income before that? Or was it we had all worked so hard to get into the school? I'm going to put up with whatever we need to put up with so that my son has a good future. And it was just that little question that really got her to thinking like, ooh, that could really shift the paradigm of this character. Something else that we like to tell our acting students, particularly if they're doing monologues for the demo reels, is like have 2 different interpretations of how you could do this character. Because more often than not, people want to see range. So if you're kind of doing it the same way, monotone, obviously you wouldn't want to be as overwrought as I was in the beginning. But you want to kind of show that there's just a little something going on there, that there are definite levels. And that casting director may sit there and go, oh, okay, well, that was great. And I could see that she was upset. Is there a way that you could find that this character would be happy about what happened to them?
I've been went back in the day when I was going on auditions, I would get hit with some form of some variation of that direction. A lot. And it's not because they necessarily, that's what they want to see the character do. They just want to see how many ways can you turn this thing upside down and backwards? How many themes and variations can you do? Is basically the reasoning behind it. But I'll just say this, especially if you get a role where you're not saying a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Or if it's one of those things where, it's like one of your first roles and you've got maybe 5 lines, and those 5 lines are not particularly telling about your character, it can just plain be a lot of fun
Mm-hmm.
to start making up backstories about your
Mm-hmm.
character. What's your happiest, or what's your character's happiest childhood memory?
Mm-hmm.
Things to that effect. And it just, particularly on camera, I mean, it's do this for, stage or camera or whatever. But when you start building up this whole life of the character, when you're doing things that they're not going to be particularly spoken about, so much of camera acting is showing and not telling.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have the, when you sort of have your character's inner life fleshed out, that adds a dimension to your camera acting that people can't quite put their finger on. It's kind of like
Mm-hmm.
a secret ingredient in a recipe, where it's
Mm-hmm.
like people are eating your, whatever your
Salsa, your sauce.
your spaghetti and meatballs, your whatever whatever your specialty is, and they're going, "That's delicious." There's some ingredient. I can't quite put my finger on it, but it's so good. That's the actor's version of the secret ingredients in the recipe, just having that inner life worked out and fleshed out. There's also something I've liked to do. There are, and I've worked with this in various capacities before, but there are various questionnaires you can get, one of which is a Proust questionnaire. Marcel Proust. He didn't invent it, but he helped to popularize this list of, I think, like 33 or 35 questions, just finding out stuff about your character, or just if you're at a party and you're trying to get to know people, there's just this list of questions. Stephen Colbert has got a thing called the Colbert questionnaire. What's your favorite sandwich?
Mm-hmm.
Things like that. The Proust tend to get more personal. What makes you sad? And you can take these same questionnaires, and there's a lot of variations of
Mm-hmm.
those are just the two that come to my mind first. But when you can start, taking those questionnaires and asking this of your character, that can be tremendously helpful. And there is something, I do have something planned to talk about here, but it's going to take a minute. So if you want to finish your thought, because and I haven't discussed this with you, it's kind of a surprise.
Well, we did actually in one episode. I think that was the first get to know you. The first 2 episodes, we did like the Proust questionnaire and things like that, which is pretty cool. But I think just, anytime you can think outside the box, and, again, at the end of the day, when we have talked about auditions, you don't have a lot of control over who's going to get picked for what. I mean, obviously, because you're not the casting director or the director, but, there's so many things that go on, before being the Ricardos and before Nicole Kidman got it. People really, really thought that the actress who was on Will and Grace, Deborah Messing, she would have been the perfect Lucy, which I have to agree with. She would have been the perfect Lucy.
Okay. All right.
But, someone at her level didn't get it because they were looking. She didn't even get a chance to audition for it, from what I understand, because they just thought, let's go with Nicole Kidman. So if someone at that level doesn't always get roles, don't feel down on yourself, because, again, it is a bit of literally a crapshoot. If they have someone in mind, again, when we talk about Nepo babies or things like that, and then the producers might go, okay, I know you want to cast your nephew, but I'd really love for you to see at least 10 or 15 other actors in the role, just to make sure that this is the direction we want to go in. So you may hit it outside the park and you don't get cast, but you might impress that casting director in that role. So then going forward, you can, and I've used it a number of times, the example of Eric Stone Street, who auditioned for Kevin on The Office. He didn't get it. The casting director said, you know what, Eric, I know you were probably maybe 2 auditions away from a series regular. And then, shortly after that, he landed Modern Family. But he really wanted to quit because he felt like, I'm just getting itty bitty parts. I know I can do more.
I know the feeling.
I know the feeling too. So, when those things happen, every audition take out your sides and say, as Bryan Cranston did on another video that's on your on your playlist on YouTube, is your job is not to get the job. Your job is to show them what you can do.
Mm-hmm.
And then because you have no control over who gets cast in what, he's lost, major roles, and major actors do all the time. And again, it may not be as much with their talent. It may be scheduling.
Mm-hmm.
It may be any number of things. So what you should look at every audition as, this is an opportunity for me to practice lines, to set up my background.
To work your craft.
Exactly. To work your craft. And what's funny was I just recently did a short film. I didn't, oddly enough, even have to audition for it.
Mm-hmm.
They saw some of my demo reels on my IMDb site and said, hey, and we talked on the phone. And then after that, she goes, yes, I want to use you. And I'm like, okay, cool. And sometimes that happens. That's probably the first time in my career that's ever happened. But hey, it was great. It was a fun role. And, we shot 9 pages, which was the length of the short film, in about 3 or 4 hours. So we shot super, super
Mm-hmm.
fast.
Which I love that.
Yeah.
I just, one of the things I really have just hated about the film process, it takes so bloody long.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all this decision by committee
Mm-hmm.
and it's just, there's all these moving parts in especially on like the bigger productions. There's just so many parts and it takes so long,
mm-hmm.
and it just doesn't have to. I always found some film sets just to be very wasteful
Mm-hmm.
Of their money, of their talent, of their time. And that just drives me crazy.
Yeah, TV sets, just because they have maybe a week or, 5 days, maybe 6 days to film an entire episode. So they may be filming 5-6 pages, depending on the length of the piece. If it's a 50-60 page script for, the hour or whatever, they may be shooting quite a bit. But yeah, on movies, sometimes you'll sit there and you'll go, we've been here 12 hours and they've only shot 90 seconds
Mm-hmm.
of what they need. And you're like, oh.
I remember some 16, 18-hour days.
Yeah.
What I do remember, and I'm not going to mention the name of the show, but this was back in the day. There was I was not on this, but people I knew who were, it was a 24-hour call. And unlike the stars, you're not, you're not in the trailer with like a comfy, place to crash out and, cappuccinos and whatever else.
That had to have been a non-union, because a union set.
Well, it was the background players were. This was and again, I'm not going to mention the name, but one time I was on and they did it to me. You get paid for a special extra, which back in the day, we're talking in the early 1980s, it was $75 for the day, and they can use you they can keep you there for as long as they bloody well please. They would get you to,
if you're in a right to work state.
What they would do is they would do it without sound, and you would mouth the words. You would just pantomime mouthing the words of whatever, and then in post-production they would have a voiceover guy come in and do the dialogue, and they would match it to your mouth, and they basically, that way they didn't have to pay you SAG wages. It wasn't illegal, but it sure wasn't nice.
Mm-hmm. Unethical.
There was that anyway. I don't mean to go off on a tangent, but the thing of it is also when you're on stuff like that and you get no direction, or little to no direction, and you kind of have to do it by yourself. It's like, okay, well, who's my character? What do they do? It's like, you've seen some of these. I can think of a couple of movies where two characters getting together and they're like observing people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, what do you think about that couple over there? It's like, oh, he's an international spy, and she's a very expensive prostitute, and they're on a mission, and she's going to seduce a world leader, and just this whole
you and I get
rigmarole.
That one a lot, don't we?
I don't know, but it's just stuff like that where you just start, it's like, okay, my character's going across the street Okay, but why? What's on the other side? Where'd you just come from? Did you just murder somebody, or did you just rob a bank, or did you just meet the love of your life, or where'd you come from, and what are you doing, and how does your character feel about that? Even if it's not being, talked about, it gives your character more life. It creates an inner life, and that's just more interesting to watch on very subtle subconscious levels.
And so, so think about that private detective who, when you're crossing the street, might be looking and going, okay, they just came from this door. I'm watching how they're walking. What just happened? I got to put that report down for that crazy overwrought woman, and let her know these are my observations. Oh, wait a minute. This might even be the phone video that I'm taking. So, if you're just taking a stroll, or you're maybe just drinking a coffee and saying hey to everybody, okay, maybe you had a really good meeting in that room and you just got hired and you just found out that you're going to get that new job. Maybe you just got fired and you're leaving, and maybe getting fired was a good thing, or maybe it was a terrible thing. There's any number of ways that you can play it, but think about if you are being, just as you're doing your character. And, another thing that we tell people to do is do everyday things as your character. How would your character make up their bed? How would your character make breakfast in the morning? Would they enjoy cooking? Would they not enjoy cooking? Do they like picking out clothes and taking time after what they look like? Or are they just going to throw on whatever they can get and get out the door? And all those things that you can just practice on your own just gives your character more of an inner life. Getting back to the short film I was working on, and that should be coming out in the next few weeks. I had to think a lot about, because a lot was talked about my past relationship. I even, actually literally bought a notebook that was like a diary, and I was writing in it in different points in my life. So if this private detective had gotten a hold of my journal, if they'd been able to read my cursive, would have gone, aha, so she did this and she did that, and she didn't tell this. And then that would have made it more interesting. I journaled about when I had my baby, my son, who was an adult in the scene that we were doing. But it really helped me get with this character and the different phases of her life to where she was at that point in time, talking with her son. And just taking those little things, whether you want to just journal on your phone or you physically want to write something, I kind of sense this woman would be somebody who handwrites her notes. That's what she does. But those are some of the, just some of the things that you can do. But, again, just thinking as a detective, if you had to track your character down and figure out where were they on the night of X, what clues would you be leaving behind that would get that detective to go, aha, either to put you at the scene or to exonerate you? To me, again, is you can play psychologist and you can play detective, and I think there's always a little bit of both in that, So
okay, here's what I want to talk about. Once upon a time, probably around the 1990, I want to say, this was before we were married, you and I were cast in a production of a show called Mad Forest. Twice. We had two different stagings of that thing. So Mad Forest was written by Caryl Churchill. It was a big cast. It was like 20 plus people.
Yeah.
And they weren't, and this was at Florida International University. It was being directed by a lady, Mary Ellen O'Brien, who actually directed the first thing she and I were ever in together. We met with Mary Ellen being our director. Loved Mary Ellen O'Brien. May she rest in peace. She's been,
she was just so loved. She was so good. We learned so much from her.
I just loved her so much. But the play was about the before, during, and after the Romanian Revolution and the overthrow of Nicolae Ceausescu
and his wife
Elena. And there were so many moving parts to this thing. It was, just to give you an idea, it was like 20 some odd people. On stage, pretty much everybody's on stage pretty much the entire time. The stage was in basically, I want to say it was maybe 70 seats in the place. And
I
they
want to
had
say it was a little bit more. It was maybe about 150, but it wasn't.
no.
Okay.
It was maybe 100 at most. But anyway, audience was sitting on the stage. Audience was sitting. You've heard of theater in the round. This was like theater all up in your business. You literally, and I remember the scenes I was in. There was supposed to be like our family's dinner table. We were sitting in there doing our scenes, and there were audience members literally sitting within arm's distance. I mean, they were right there. I personally had performed in a couple of plays like that where you had the audience. It was like a very European staging. It's like, I mean, these people are like, this audience is like smack dab close up in your face. A lot of people in this had not performed in that way. So there was a lot of just detective work in figuring out how in the absolute bloody hell are we supposed to do these performances. I mean, and the show was long. The show was about 3 hours. It had an intermission and about 3 hours worth of show. There were some really physical parts of it. It was exhausting, and
then you had characters doing monologues, which my character did.
Okay. Well, let me say, it was about the Romanian Revolution, which a lot of us didn't really know about, or at least so there was a lot of going to the library. Now, fortunately, we were at a university, so I remember you and I and several people from the cast, like, we would get together like hours before rehearsal and go over to the library and just start doing homework and just, researching what happened with, just all this stuff. And the story is like incredible of what happened. But it was a very complicated story. It was a very modern, there were some parts of it were almost like avant-garde staging. So we had to figure out, how are we going to do this? We had to figure out, okay, what story is it that we're trying to tell? Because this is a story of a people who were just oppressed. I mean, oppressed is, to just isn't even the beginning of it. And this society of people went, okay, screw this. We're done. And they went right to the palace. They pulled their asses out. And what happened was we were playing like these. It's like basically the story was like, I was the son from this richer family within the Romanian culture, and I was marrying a girl who's considered poor. So there's like a lot of Romeo and Juliet stuff going on, and just like the caste war and the hierarchy and of where my family was as compared to their family was, and what all that
colors
meant.
That people wore.
There was that. So we had to figure out that story. Then in Act 2, we're all playing totally different characters who were doing these monologues, and it was kind of like a play for voices in that. What was happening is like, you were telling the story of what was going on during the point where the people went, okay, Nikolai, we're done, dude. We're going to string you up, and so we had to figure out really what happened then. And we had to speak in Romanian accents, which is kind of, because it's kind of like a Slavic Romance language. And it's got the very hard, like Russian kind of sounds, but at the same time, there's this melodious thing. There's this
softness to it.
It's kind of like a very sweet, sing-songy kind of Slavic Russian type thing.
Yeah.
And so we had to get a guy. There was actually a student they found on campus who was an exchange student from Romania. He came in, he coached us on how to do the accents. So that was a whole other thing that we had to do the research on. That before the audience came in, we were outside of the theater. Some people had these like megaphones reading news stories that the protesters at the time of the uprising would have been reading. So there was that whole education that we had to find out about.
There was a lot of detective pieces to put together.
There was also, I'll never forget this. I thought this was one of the most difficult things I ever did as an actor. In the very beginning of the show, Act 1, the whole cast gets on stage, and we're supposed to be like a bunch of basically like 7-year-olds. And we all had to get together like we were doing a school production, doing a poem in Romanian. I don't learn languages very easily. So that for me was getting over that and actually a friend of ours told me, try singing it.
Yeah.
And this is advice I've given this to people, and all of a sudden, I just was like, oh my God, I've got it. And so, Elena Ceausescu molto fericire, Elena vreau să învăț tot, emen sarcat să fu de politica sin finti umana. And something about Elena dorește la Inleșneșca, and then something else. And
I remember one line was "Sorcat de porta de politica."
Oh yeah,
which is I stay clear of the political side.
Sin finta humana, which is I am only a human being. And I guess the point of all this is, as far as doing detective work on that particular play, there was any amount of it. I mean, we had to figure out these accents. We had to know the news story. We had to know the history of what we were talking about.
And keeping in mind there wasn't really an internet at that point.
Yeah, we did. Oh yeah, we could not go Google any of this stuff.
So you had to go pull books. You had to go to encyclopedias and get your. Yeah. So we all could have, but in a way, I think that built us as an ensemble.
It did. But the thing of it is also just because there were so many moving parts to this, and there was they were taking a pretty big risk doing this play because it was
political.
It was political. It was complicated. There was so much to go wrong in that thing. And on top of the practical stuff of just, figuring out what story it is that we're trying to tell and who are we and where do we come from as characters trying to tell the story, there was just a lot of technically, how do we as actors adjust what we know? Because I mean, as I say, I had worked in that kind of theater before. And if you're not used to, and pretty much nobody, I think other than me,
I had done improv where the audience does get up close.
They do get up close.
That in itself didn't throw me that much.
But there was a point also where the woman playing my mother had to slap the crap out of me in the mouth. And that happened with people right there. We had to do a fight scene at it's like at the wedding, both families just got into this huge, massive altercation. And there's 15 people involved in this. And we're all just doing this fight choreography and, punching each other. And the actress who was playing my new bride, she has to jump on me and get on my back and start screaming and slapping me. So there was all this stuff we had never done before.
And then avoiding audience members who are sitting there going, oh my God.
I mean, and the way that it was also, the set designer had put up, he had done painted replicas of the Berlin Wall and all the graffiti, and it went completely all the way around the place. And then at the top of this thing, I swear to God, the guy had literal barbed wire around the whole thing. And it's just kind of you've got to be kidding me. There's barbed wire a foot from my head. So there was all of that stuff to deal with. And on top of it all, it was the production was staged twice. The first, I remember the first time we were not engaged. When we came back for the second, we had gotten engaged. And the thing that I remember, because there was some parts of it just were so, it was just so much that I think, no, I don't think I know Mary Ellen, the director. I know there were some points, I don't think her voice was particularly clear. And she was having to give us direction. And then we were in rehearsal and it just wasn't working. It just wasn't gelling. So she would have to go back and go, okay, well, I gave him this direction. Now maybe we're going to throw that out and give him this new direction. So she was going through this big learning process and this exploratory thing of throwing stuff on the wall and see what sticks and what doesn't. And you don't find that out by other than just doing it, hitting the books and taking the information and then putting it to the test. And it's so much about acting. It really is research. Just, not just of who your character is and what's the story that they're trying to tell, but, just what's going on with your fellow castmates, what kind of energy are they bringing to the party here? There's just, you really, I'll say as an actor, it really does not serve you particularly well for the most part to be just totally isolated. And you've got to look at the information and the actions and reading the room around you and have all of that be incorporated into the totality of your performance. And that show, I can tell you, was very, that show really, when we were talking about this, I was like, I got to talk about Matt Forrest, because there was so much exploration to that thing. And I remember, what I particularly remember about this is, supposedly the title Mad Forest, referred to a forest in Romania, that as people were going through it, you had to keep your wits about you. You had to stay focused on what you were doing. You had to, be mindful of, what's the last steps you took in this trip through the forest, and you have in mind where you intend to go with this. And if you do not, this forest was such that the legend would have it, it's like, you would become lost in the forest. You would just be wandering out in circles for the rest of your life, and you become
mad.
You would just go crazy. And I remember telling my mom, when I was doing the show, I was like, this play is like a Mad Forest. There's so much going on. There's so many tricks and turns, and there's so much you gotta know what you're talking about. There's so much, that if you don't, you're going to get so hopelessly lost in this play. You're going to look like an absolute fool in front of this audience. And you got to keep your head and your wits and, and your thoughts and your emotions really about you, or this is going to be a big mess. And I think one of the reasons it got done twice is that the director, she was able to clarify for herself exactly what she wanted out of a scene, and what worked and what didn't. And so there was a lot of detective work going on there, and I think you really had to approach it in that way of, you're on a fact-finding mission for this whole thing, and you just really cannot leave any stone unturned. And I've never really, and I mean, back in the day, I did a ton of plays. I directed a ton of plays. I acted in a ton of them. That one to me stood out as really having the most preparation required to get up and do that play. It's that to me. I just wanted to bring that up because it kind of crystallizes what you're talking about.
Yeah. And actually, I remember when you say that, I was the little, when you were doing the monologue part in like Act 2, and I had this character who was the little flower seller, and Rodica. And she kind of had to talk about why she justified beating her child because he not take care.
Yeah.
And I remember one night I was saying, and I was into the moment, but there was just a part of me that grieved for this character, that this is how she thought she could show a parental sense of duty and guidance, was by, hurting her child. And Kelley, the actress, just on stage started to grieve for this character. I mean, it totally worked because it would have seemed like she would have broken down while talking about it. But I just was like, whoa, I just got this. And I felt like this character's like, you need to do it like this. And it was just very interesting that she, and I mean, I've left myself open to that. But at that point, when you're doing improv, and we'll see this in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, you're in character, but you don't really have as much time. You're so in the moment. But for that moment, when I just felt like she jumped in and said, people need to still be on my side and not hate me by the time you finish. They need to see my anguish at hurting my child.
And I'll say this also. I remember the very end of the show, after like this whole, 3 hours of just turning yourself inside out. And what we had to do is, like, during the last act, a couple of the backstage people, they would basically, right outside the exit of the theater, they set up this memorial on the ground, which was not there prior to the audience coming in. But when the audience came in, people are, out protesting with megaphones and talking about, Ceausescu was a murderer, and we've got to get him out of here, and by any means necessary. And then we go through this whole show and the tale of these two families and all the citizens and all that they went through, and then the wedding, and then how the two families are just clashing, and even though the dictator is out of power, I remember the line is, "Okay, I'm confused," or it was worse to the effect of, I don't know who to hate.
Yeah.
And there was no There was no resolution to it, even though the dictator was gone. The crisis had not been resolved, and so then lights come down, and we've all got up, run outside, run around the back of the theater, and there was this big, with like flowers and candles and all this stuff, and it was this memorial sort of a thing. And then we all had to get either down on our knees and be praying, or standing and holding each other and weeping or something like that. And you just be into it, and you hear the doors to the theater open, and people would be going chatter, 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 and then they would see this, and they just hear it and just silence.
And I thought that was just a brilliant way, because it immersed them even more into it. But yeah, so, if you are doing a historical play, sometimes you've got to be a historical detective. How would my character, we did one show on A Tale of Two Booths. And so for me, I got to go back in time, and I'm a history nerd, and go, oh, so Edwin Booth apparently had saved Lincoln's son from falling over on a train platform. I did not know that. And so what was interesting, were I going to portray, or, be directing someone who is going to portray Edmund Booth, just say, the one thing in a weird way that comforted him after what his brother did was that he knew that he had saved, Lincoln's son, so that, he could live another day. And that, to me, I was like, oh, wow, that would be a rich fact to know, rather than feeling like, okay, I did something good to counter what my brother did. But, again, those are the things that can be fun. It's finding the puzzles, whether you love to do puzzles, whether you love to do detective work, whether you're a history nerd, whether you just really want to find out, but just fleshing that out for yourself. And then that can give you the energy for your objectives, your obstacles, your inner life, pulling it all together. What is your inner monologue with that? So it just makes what you do as an actor richer.
And I was watching some stuff last night about this. Basically, I was coming across these, YouTube reels and shorts, and I was, and I was watching like Margot Robbie was one, Cillian Murphy was another one, Stephen Yeun was another one, and basically it was like, how do you prepare? And every single one of them, they were using different words and everything, but it was like research. And before I even get it, it's like research. It's not enough to know to just know your lines. There's a whole other life and a whole bunch of other detective work, be it historical, psychological, emotional, personal, whatever it is. All those blanks have got to be filled in if you are to deliver a fully formed, fully fleshed out character, rather than somebody who is regurgitating rote memorization of dialogue.
And, I'll give you, and I can include some of this in the show notes, but when you're writing a character profile, and again, this is whether you're a writer or an actor, of course, you've got the name, the age, the physical description. What kind of home or neighborhood did they live in? What is their relationship status? Their family background, other close relatives, dress style, religion. What is their attitude to religion? Because what you're given religion and your attitude towards religion may be very different. Favorite pastimes, hobbies, sports, foods, strongest positive personality trait, and then strongest negative personality trait. Sometimes you just need to think that out. Do they have a sense of humor? Are they easy to have a temper? Do they have consideration for others? And then how do you think other people see them? You do have the other characters and things like that, but, outside of that, what is their opinion of themselves? Other traits, especially those that can be brought out in the story. Most important thing to know about this character, will the viewers like them or dislike them? Because a lot of times, even bad characters, they don't see themselves as the bad guy. They're doing what they need to do to take care of business, to take care of themselves. So, they're not going to be in the corner turning their mustache going, evil plans. It's like, no, I'm doing what I need to do to take care of business, to survive.
Any amount of Shakespeare's villains on their first speeches, like, since it's like, okay, this is why I'm going to be a bad guy, and I'm fully justified in this.
And then some other additional questions. If your character has a job, is he or she good at it? Does he or she like what they do? What are your character's habits? What's the secret dream that they have that they wouldn't tell you about? What kind of person does your character wish he or she could be? And what's stopping them from being that person, from realizing who they are? I like that one a lot. What does your character think he or she is their worst quality? What other people think about their character's worst quality is, because what you think your worst quality is may be very different from how other people see that. What was their childhood home like? That was a good question that, again, was asked Viola Davis by Meryl Streep. What did your father do? What's the most terrible thing that ever happened to him or her? What was their dream growing up, and did they achieve this dream in other ways that the character expected? And one good example, because we did a table read at the office, and Michael Scott, when they do Bring Your Daughter to Work Day, and you get to see Michael as a little boy on this show, and he wanted to have 100 children so that he could have 100 friends, and no one could say no to him and wouldn't like him. And you're just going, oh my gosh,
Dude.
He was, well, did you ever get married? No. Do you have kids? No. Whereas one of the other guys ended up being the local weatherman, because he said, I want to be on TV. Oh my gosh, that's Chad Anderson. He is on TV. So it was, but I mean, for me, that was such a great tell for Michael Scott, because that's what he wanted. He wants friends so badly. In what situation would your character become violent? And then in what situation would your character become heroic? So again, if you're a writer or an actor, these are really good questions to ask yourself, just going forward with that.
Stay curious.
Yeah, absolutely.
Stay curious.
All right. Well, I hope this has been helpful. Again, I'll put some of these traits in the show notes so you can look at them for yourself. Again, for writers, actors, or just anybody who's interested in being more creative. And again, thank you guys so much for listening. We really appreciate it.
Oh, my love, guys.
We appreciate you guys tuning in, and keep in mind that you can catch us on our social media, Creative Actors Lab on Instagram and Facebook, and by the same name on YouTube. And for more on what we do, you can go to our website,
creativeactorslab.com, all one word. Thank you for listening. Stay curious, make art.org. Much love until next time.